Hmm. All right, welcome everybody to Ben's Book Club. We're kicking off the very first Ben's Book Club of 2023. I did have to take a second then to realize what year it was.
Yeah, me too.
Definitely 2023. We'll just let everybody come in. As you come in, guys, we love to do this in Ben's Book Club. We love to have you type into the chat just where you're from, where you're tuning in from. We saw got a bit of a record, I think, is Los Angeles. We had someone in from Berlin once. If
Mm.
someone's from Antarctica, you got to let us know, please. But yeah, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from.
Oh,
Hello,
Cat from
Kat
Bathurst.
from Bathurst. That's awesome. This
Love
is
Bathurst.
this is Jack, by the way. I might as well introduce him because
Hi.
he's talking already, which we want to get him involved. Jack Heath. We're here to talk with Jack. He's the award-winning author of 40 thrillers. So if you've liked this book this month, you have a tremendous back catalogue to go through. His novels have been translated into 8 languages and adapted for film. He lives on Ngunnawal land in Canberra, Australia. Jack Heath. Everybody welcome Jack. Welcome everybody. From the USA. Heck yeah, Jinder. Let's give Jack a round of applause.
Oh, that's very nice. I haven't actually done anything yet.
Yeah,
Thank you for
well,
having me at your book club.
you did do something. You wrote a book that we've all read. Hello, Fiona from the Gold Coast. Can you see the chat as well, Jack? You can see
So
where everyone's.
yeah, I can see things popping up the bottom. That's awesome. So given that this is a book club, meaning everyone's either read the book or they're pretending to have read the book, so this can be like a spoilery sort of thing. That's my experience of book clubs.
That's right, mate. Yeah, we're right.
I am always the one who brings the salt and vinegar chips knowing that no one else likes them and then eats the whole bag. That's me at book
Ah,
club.
that's your trick. I see.
Yeah.
I see. I don't think beyond this book club, I don't know whether I've ever been part of like a really big book club. There was sort of these like false starts at work, but this has been the most consistent one that I've been a part of. Hey, from
Yeah.
Hobart, I want to go to Tasmania so bad.
Tasmania is beautiful. My parents are there right now doing exactly the trip that my wife and I were planning for our 10-year wedding anniversary in which got cancelled due to COVID. I mean, the
Oh,
anniversary happened, like you can't stop the flow of time, but
no.
yeah, so they're like living our dream with this sort of these beautiful walking trails and stuff, and still can't can't complain.
What did you do
We'll
though? What was the pivot in COVID times? What did you do?
we went horse riding in
That's a good pivot.
it was a good pivot. Yeah,
Yeah.
didn't do it immediately. We postponed it a little bit, but I discovered that riding a horse is harder than it looks, but also scarier. Like particularly when they're going down these sort of rocky slopes. I'm like, this
You're gonna
doesn't
tip
feel
over.
like this doesn't feel like riding a horse. This feels like a really big guy is giving me a piggyback and like walking down a terrifying trail. And I'm like, if this horse breaks a leg, I'm going to break my whole body. This is
Oh
so
no.
frightening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when they're going downhill thing, you always feel like you're gonna tip forward. That's my experience, at least. Never feel
exactly.
fully satisfied. We've got
Yeah.
Coburg, North Victoria. Few people from Tasmania. You guys, can you please do something so I can come down? Like there needs to be, I don't know, maybe I need to set a book in Tasmania, Jack, or something like that, right?
Maybe you do. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah, interesting.
although come to think of it, I think it depends on the genre that you're writing in, but my books are pretty escapist, meaning that the people who read them aren't don't tend to be the people who live in the places that I'm writing about. They are people like me who do not live there and would like to experience it as an outsider. So even if you wrote a book in like my my Hangman series is set in Houston, Texas. I'm not aware of having any readers of it in Houston, Texas. They're all it's very popular in Germany. People like it in Russia. No readers in Texas that I'm aware of because it's an escapist thing. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But on that, like it is do you feel like people who loudly proclaim that they love this book, you also start to get a little bit sus of them a little bit, and you're sort of like, why do all the Germans like like the cannibal?
yeah, kind of. I had this thing where because I wrote exclusively for children and young adults until Hangman came out, or until I started writing Hangman anyway. So yeah, there's a people eater joke in the book, Jane. So but I had this fear that because I'd started writing for adults, and not only was it Hangman, my first book for adults, it was really sort of twisted. It had every monstrous thought that I had never been able to put in a children's book that had
Yeah.
been sort of building up a backlog in my head. And so whenever a book comes out, particularly early on in your career, you're always scared of the reviews. But in this case, I was worried that the reviews would say, like, not only is this a terrible book, only a terrible person could have written it. What I did not foresee was that everyone would love the book and then I would be deeply suspicious of anyone who liked it.
Just
I'm
adding,
like,
like,
what is wrong with you that you would read this kind of stuff that I wrote?
yeah. So you have like a hangman, conference where you're the author on this panel, and everyone's there to just they're fans of your book, and you're sort of like, sorry,
Exactly. It's like
Falco. Yes, nothing's wrong with the German Falco, absolutely, but why do they all like the books though, Falco? That's my question. I don't know. I'm not saying anything, but there's like a line there, maybe,
yeah.
or maybe not. Maybe
To
they're
be
just good
serious
taste.
for a moment, I suspect it probably has more to do with them having like a really good translator than anything about. I think it's very easy as a monolingual English speaking author whose work has been translated to just assume that the readers in other countries love me, but actually, I mean, so much of what makes a book good is the writing style, and all of that is the translator rather than me. So I think just and I'm blanking on the name, which I feel really bad about. But whoever wrote the German editions of the Hangman books must have done a great job because it's
Yeah,
very
for sure.
popular over there.
And yeah, to be serious though, it is a fantastic series, and so
Oh, thank you.
everyone's right to love it.
I'm glad it was to your taste.
We're making all these taste jokes. Can I say I made fried rice for dinner? You've changed how I think about cooking now, and it's really disturbing because now when I was cooking the fried rice, the little thought flits across your mind, and you're like, what part of the human being would I put into my fried rice? Unless that's just me. Can you guys in the chat, can you please? Yeah, see, Jane. Thank you, Jane.
Yes.
Can you guys
Oh,
please
you are
say
twisted,
that?
Jane. Yes, that's fantastic.
Can you please just give me a thumbs up or something and just let me know that I'm not alone? All right. That I'm not. Jane and I are not alone on this ledge, that you do start to think about things a little differently. Is that how now when you cook or when you eat, mate, do you think things throughout like that?
Well, the book writing this series actually turned me into a vegetarian. That sounds like a joke, but it's not.
Really?
Like, yeah, I was a pretty serious carnivore before I started writing this series. But I think, and I have no particular, it's not like I had a long-standing interest in cannibalism, says he defensively. I was just looking for something that the reader would find unforgivable that I could then manipulate the reader into forgiving. That was sort of the challenge that I set myself at the beginning.
That's
But
good.
as I was writing the series, my own kind of ethical thoughts about meat started to come out because I was writing this character who doesn't see a meaningful difference between eating an animal and eating a person. And then something weird happened, which was that I didn't. I had thought about going vegetarian, but then thought, well, I don't want to have a difficult dietary requirement. All my friends eat meat. I don't want to be the one person who can't go to the steakhouse with everyone else. So
Yeah.
I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and not rock the boat. And then because Blake thinks there's no difference between eating an animal and eating a person, the series became extremely popular with vegetarians and vegans, many of whom also don't see a meaningful difference between eating an animal and eating a person.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
suddenly I had all these vegetarian friends that I could go out to dinner with. And I also had kind of a successful series that meant that I kind of wasn't so reluctant to stand up for my own beliefs and worry about being attacked. And so eventually I'm like, yeah, I'm confident enough to rock someone else's boat now. I just won't eat meat anymore. And I didn't.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's the long and I'm not telling anyone else what to do, by the way.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know
yeah,
that
for sure.
vegetarians sound very judgmental, like, judgy and preachy, and it's only
No,
been
no.
like a year and a half of my life. But anyway, that's how Blake made changed the way I cook.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That the book really did change the way you think about things. Was that just through the first book, or was that through multiple in the
No,
series? we got there.
multiple books in the series, yeah.
Hmm.
So I didn't go vegetarian until like a year and a half ago, and I've been working on this series since. I started writing the first draft of the first book in 2008. So
Wow.
it's been like most of my life I've had this character kind of living in my head.
Yeah, right.
Um, if
Yeah,
I
cool.
close my eyes, I can hear his voice. I know that sounds insane, but it's true.
No, no, I want to talk about that. Just very quickly though, for everyone who's new to Ben's book club, the way we normally style our book club is that we're very interactive. So if while reading the book you've had any questions for Jack that you'd love to pass to him, now's your opportunity. We open up the chat.
Did you
We're
just say
just,
pasta him? I think
I did. I
I
wish
saw
I'd meant it.
someone,
Yeah, that's
yep,
great.
someone recommended the ear-shaped pasta, and I think that seeped down into your subconscious. That
Maybe
was
it did.
Tony. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony. And how do you say orecchiette? I can't do Italian. I wish I could. Um, yeah, so the book series has been brewing since 2008. But
Yeah.
can I ask, were you sort of, I don't want to use the word trapped because you weren't trapped, but you were within that other sort of sphere of writing for young adults and younger readers. And
Hmm.
then was it a big change and a big pivot to go towards writing adult books? Like, was that hard to say with the publisher and things like that?
Oh yeah, the publication was a very rocky road. So I never really saw myself as writing for children in the first place. When I was writing my first novel, I thought it was a novel for adults, but I was like a 13-year-old kid when I started writing it. So a 13-year-old's idea of a great book for adults turns out to be basically YA. So that was how I ended up writing young adult fiction. And then as in those sort of first few years of my career, I was always pushing to include more and more adult stuff, more violence, more sex, more coarse language, all these things, because that was the kind of media that I was consuming as an adult myself. And the publisher was always pushing back because, yes, some of my readers were 17, but some of them were as young as 10 or 12. So
Mhm.
there was always this kind of push-pull relationship with my publisher on content. Then once I started writing for adults, suddenly I actually had a vehicle to put all that content in, which meant that my children's books became actual children's books as opposed to just sort of sanitized
Mm.
adult books. So being able to kind of separate out those two halves of my career really helped me creatively. But as far as the publication goes, I mean, I sent this book to Pan Macmillan Australia, who was my publisher at the time for
Yeah.
young adult fiction. And my publisher called me and she said, "So why did you write this?" Which is not really what you want to hear from your publisher. I was like, "Oh boy, that's not good news at all."
Not a good
Um,
sign.
yeah, so I rewrote it. They still didn't like it. My agent sent it to some other people who also didn't like it. In addition to the fact that this was sort of just after Borders and Angus and Robertson had collapsed, so it was a
Mm.
hard time in the industry generally. But I
Yeah.
shouldn't pretend that was the only reason it got turned down. It was partly because I hadn't found a genre for it yet. Like the story and the character were there, but at first I was writing it as though I was Cormac McCarthy, like it was literary fiction, and no one
Oh,
really
really?
liked that. Yeah. And
And I really want to see that. Let me know.
well, I
Sounds
mean,
really interesting.
Child of God by Cormac McCarthy is about a guy. I don't think that guy eats anybody, but there's certainly some necrophilia in that book. Which so that's a twisted book, man. Anyway, so I kind of
Jack is a
rewrote it
very
like it
twisted
was
man.
a yeah, I rewrote it like it was a horror novel, and that still didn't work. It was only when I discovered that it was a crime novel that
Yeah.
then, and also what happened was there was this guy named Ben Sanders, a Kiwi writer,
I know, Ben.
really right. Isn't he great? He's amazing.
Mhm.
I had such a roller coaster when I realized he was younger than me, and he writes so well and with
Yeah.
such wisdom. And anyway, so he wrote American Blood, which was written by a Kiwi but set in the United States. Pretty gruesome crime novel. Came out in January 2016, something like that, and it did unexpectedly well for Allen and Unwin. Then in January 2017, he had a sequel, the name of which escapes me, and then for January 2018, he didn't have another book. So the publisher was like, okay, we need something for January because we know that release spot works. It needs to be as similar as possible, like set in America, gruesome crime novel. And then my agent just remembered that Hangman existed. This book that I'd long since given up on, it had been
Wow.
in a drawer as a failed experiment. She's like, "Oh, you might like this," and then Jane Palfreyman at Allen and Unwin was like, "Yep, that's perfect, nailed it. That's exactly what we need. But Jack, you'll need a new ending." And I'm like, "Ooh, do I? How? Please fix this, fix my novel."
Yeah,
And she gave me a
right.
much better ending. So there you go. That's what happened.
Oh, she actually gave you the ending. That's
Not a so. I mean, she didn't write it for me exactly, but just to
prompted you to rethink it, sort of thing.
definitely. And actually, since this we're talking about Headcase today, the
Yeah.
ending of Headcase is basically the ending of my first draft of Hangman. But the
Oh,
point is, it took 4 books to get there. I tried to do that ending after only 1 book, and it didn't make sense. After 4 books, it feels like Blake has earned that particular ending. So
yeah, cool.
yeah.
We've got a few questions in chat here. We have I just want to read this one from Jen.
Hmm.
Jen is asking, haven't read the series yet. I have to confess, I haven't read the series yet either. This is my first one.
Okay.
Do they have to be read in order? I thoroughly enjoyed this one, but it did make me want to go back and establish the story. I think you'd recommend that you read it from the start, but
Uh,
you can dive
I'm
in as well.
I'm never sure what to say to that exactly because I definitely write each one as a standalone, and so partly because I know some people read series out of order, but also I don't know about you, but even if I've read a series in order, by the time I get around to reading book 3, I've almost always forgotten everything that happened in book 1. So I always need to put in. I write each one as though the reader will remember nothing from the previous ones.
Yeah.
So the only benefit to reading them in order really is that you won't get kind of reverse spoilers. Like in the case of Headcase, you'll notice in chapter 1 that the main character has only one arm.
Yeah.
And if you start reading Hangman and he's got 2 arms, you're like, oh, well, okay, clearly something's going to happen to his arm at some point over the course of this story. So there's that. But there's also the fact that I've actually become a better writer over time. So my instinct is to say, nah, read Headcase, forget about the rest of them because like I've, I've gotten better with practice. I know this character now better than I did when I wrote Hangman. But I'm also aware that that's a thing that I do to myself psychologically all the time. I always think I've grown more than I actually have. When I go back and look at my old work, I always expect it to be terrible and then it's quite good. And then I'm like, well, I guess that's good news, but it also means I haven't actually developed as much as I would like to think.
Yeah, I understand that completely. Yeah, I think it's fine to jump into. It was, and there's a few people who said, yeah, Anne Marie is saying this here. Headcase was my first, was great as a standalone book. I do agree, but
Awesome.
I did like reading. You know, he was missing an arm because
Yeah.
it did make me go, I want to read the story about how he lost his arm. So it's very clever. I remember those books that would always start with like this big info dump of the 4 books that came prior to the series. You did a really clever thing here, though. You sort of gave us the info dump, but you also disguised it. Do you work really hard at those sort of subtle things? Yeah.
You noticed that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I I guess I always try to work out a way to naturally put in the information
That's it. It was
that
very
you're
subtle.
going to need. Yeah, and but it's always difficult to decide also how much to include, like how much the reader actually needs to know. Should I give them just the bare essentials,
Mm.
or do I want to catch them up as though they've read the whole series, or find some balance between the two? So in this case, I didn't include the psychiatrist for that reason. Like that wasn't my strategic, clever way of doing an info dump. But given that I needed to do an info dump and the plot already had a psychologist in it,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is perfect. He can just tell her and the reader what just the bare essentials of what they need to know from the previous books, and then we can kind of move on.
Yeah, but you naturally got to it without just inventing Doctor Exposition. You got to exposition naturally. That's really cool. And that's why it does read that way, where it is very natural.
Yeah.
Can we go back? I really want to talk about, because I was camping over the holidays when I read this book,
Mm.
and my wife loves reading thrillers. She likes reading crime books, and I said to her, "Well, here's this book I'm reading," and she's like, "Oh, it kind of looks interesting. What's it about?" And so I said, "Well," and I gave her the pitch that there's this cannibal who gets paid for his enterprise with dead bodies he can devour, and You should have
And
seen her face.
yep, no deal. Unsubscribe, unsubscribe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, did that this is one of the things I think was the most fun with this book. You must have just written this book because you loved it, right? You wouldn't have thought, or is it that cannibals are popular? You know what I mean? Like you've got the Hannibal TV show that was a pretty big hit. There's a few other series. I mean, there was just a new movie just come out just recently, like
Yep.
a love story with.
Fresh, I think it's called.
No, there's one called Bones and All as
Oh
well.
wow, okay. There's yep, there's lots. They're everywhere.
You've got
Yeah.
Timothy Chalamet in it, and like it's a big genre. Like, did you when you came up with the idea? I guess I'm saying, was it? Did you just naturally find it and just thought this is really interesting, and I would love to see what happens, or was there the market involved? Did you actually think about what would be popular a little bit?
No, I never think of the market. If I think of the market, it always goes horribly wrong. And I'm aware that that's like a privileged thing to say, like because if you tell writers, oh, you should just write your truth, and then if your truth happens to be profitable, then great, and if not, you'll starve to death in a gutter. Like that's a terrible way of putting it. But I
No,
guess
no, yeah.
when when I started writing the first book, Hangman, like I said, I was looking for something unforgivable, and I went through various things. Like he could have just been, like a garden variety racist or something like that. Which, oddly enough, I think most readers might find harder to forgive
Mhm.
than
I would
eating
agree with
people,
that.
which is
Yep.
much. I think cannibalism works because it's so far out there that no one actually has any direct experience of it.
Yeah.
Even supposed real life cannibals often turn out to be like just having the stories have been exaggerated and didn't really happen. Not always, but often. But what was definitely kind of soaking into my subconscious at the time was that in 2008, when I started writing this story, or rather in 2005, 2006, like the years prior, zombie movies were really in vogue.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that the zombie movies were so scary, this was back when zombies were scary and not just, cartoony and funny like they are now. Um, it's because we all have that sort of lizard brain fear of no longer being at the top of the food chain. Like we eat
Mm.
so many things, and the fear that something might eat us is just, always kind of lingering in our evolutionary
Horrifying.
subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, that's the scariest thing I can think of, being eaten alive. So therefore, a person who eats other people is the worst, scariest character that I can come up with. That's kind of how that happened. But
Yeah.
when other people, when someone recommended the movie Fresh to me just recently, they're like, "Oh, you should watch this new movie. It's got a cannibal in it. You'd love it." I was just like your wife. I'm like, "No, unsubscribe. I don't. That doesn't sound good. Yuck, gross." So
Is
I'm
it?
always walking that line between trying to.
Mm.
He's a cannibal, which is his hook. It's what gets the reader's attention, but it's also what puts the most people off. So I'm always kind of doing a bit of a balancing act where I'm trying to get the attention of the people who will like the book without putting off the people who think it's going to be more gruesome than it is.
Yeah, on that, I was just going to mention that Erin actually said in the chat, she said, I have also found it hard to sell how much I enjoyed the book. I feel I need to almost not reveal a whole heap about the book. And then up here, Jane also mentioned, I felt sick when I knew what it was going to be about, but the way it's written is not so gory. And it is kind of the first thing he eats is the little earlobe off the guy. Like it's
Yeah, dead astronaut earlobe,
yeah, it's kind of
a delicacy in
endearing.
some countries.
Yeah, well, put that in your fried rice. Clearly up the um, but
Yeah,
yeah, it must be such a balancing act for you to be able to balance this sense of fun with and light. It's almost like you handle it really deftly, like it's really clever. And I never felt, I always dreaded turning the page and I was going to read about cutting and cooking, and I just didn't want to read that. But I never really got to the point where I felt grossed out. That must be really
yeah.
hard to get that balance right.
It is difficult, but it's getting easier with practice. Again, that first draft of that first book, it was pretty gruesome, but more gruesome than the finished product. But also, I think the main problem was that it was monotonous. Like readers hate monotony.
Mm.
So I went, okay, I'm going to strip it back so there's like one really icky bit near the end, and everything else, well, there can be, instead of it being like gross the whole way through, you can have a funny chapter, and you can have a sad chapter, and you can have a sexy chapter, and you do kind of the same thing with that you do with every book, where you just try to provide a whole heap of emotional contrast. So often, and that doesn't mean that it's like he's only a cannibal in one chapter. It just means that sometimes it's mostly him joking about being a cannibal. He's kind of making the reader laugh, and other times you're supposed to be scared of what he might do but isn't actually doing. And then usually there'll be one bit where he takes a bite out of something where the reader goes, ugh. But I try to limit myself to only one of those per book, because again, it's not a horror novel, it's crime. People read this for fun, not they're not like daring themselves to read it as an extreme sport, in the same way as some horror readers do. No disrespect to horror readers, I used to be one of those people, but now I have kids, I have enough unnecessary stress in my life. I'm like, I'm not going to read things that are just unpleasant for the sake of being able to tell people how extreme they were. I really want reading to be fun.
I can 100% agree. I wanted to make mention, a few people have mentioned these. These are also my kids' books. These are some of their favorite books.
Oh, terrific.
They buy these at their book fairs. So every time they go, they find a new one. Do you find it difficult to flip back and forth with tones? Because there is something very Jack Heath about because I was familiar with reading these books. Then when I read this wonderful book, I could still tell it was you. It wasn't like you're putting on a different dress. Like, it's the same Jack Heath. But surely, like, do you have rules or something that you have to follow in order? Or is it just...
Scholastic made it pretty straightforward. So this is the publisher of most of my children's books. When I first started writing for them back in 2013, I think was when I got the contract, they were looking for something Goosebumps-ish. And I said, okay, well, how scary can I make it? I mean, it's for kids. Where's the line? And they said, oh, you can make it as scary as you want. We don't care about you giving the kids nightmares. Just make sure there's no sex, no suicide or any kind of self-harm, no drugs or references to drugs, and the audience that you're writing for isn't interested in romance either. Like that shouldn't be a part of it. So I'm like, oh, okay. So there's just some no-go zones. I'll just avoid those landmines and it'll be fine. But then over the course of that writing for that age group, that sort of 8 to 12 age group that I hadn't really worked with before, the other thing that they were really pushing on me was like, it can't just be a good story overall. Each scene has to be thrilling, because these kids have plenty of other ways to spend their time. They get bored easily. They will switch to Angry Birds or TikTok or whatever is popular at any given time. You need each chapter to be thrilling. We like cliffhangers. We like all that sort of stuff. And over the course of doing that, trying to make every single page exciting thing, that is kind of what carried over to my adult fiction. I think it was when I'm writing for adults, I'm like, okay, I don't have to avoid all those landmines anymore, the sex, the suicide, the drugs and stuff, but I still have that instinct that every chapter needs to have something in it that's going to make the reader keep going. I can't switch that off. Which is not, I mean, I do admire those authors who can write a book in which nothing happens and it's nevertheless very engaging, or you feel profoundly moved by the end of it. I've just finished reading 2 of those, but I am not that guy, it turns out.
I would also say the way you structure as well, just by... In fact, there's a few similarities between the 2 of these, in that in this, you sort of go from the main action and then you go to the psychologist's office, and the balance of how you dole out information in the psychologist's office, it was perfect. So I was in the main narrative, and then whenever I went to the psychologist, I felt, oh, I'm actually excited to read what happens with this. It wasn't like one got, like, you must have... Do you have like a big chart where you have that mapped out, or is it just where you write and you're like, you naturally feel time to go back to the psychologist's office and reveal a little more there?
Yeah, neither. The truth is that it came together in the editing, really. So I wrote it. So you've got these three different timelines going, right? The present day in the psychologist's office, like 2 weeks earlier at NASA, and then 7 years before that at the FBI with the
Yes.
kidnapping and stuff.
Yes.
And so, firstly, when I wrote the first draft, that 7 years ago timeline just wasn't there. And the reason it came about was because a great writer named Benjamin Stevenson,
Mhm.
author of Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, which is an amazing book.
Amazing
Um,
title, by the way.
I know, bloody Ben. I wrote a book called Kill Your Brother, and he just had to one up me with everyone in my family has killed someone. Um, anyway, so he read an early draft of Headcase, and he was like, "So why did the CIA send Blake to investigate this?" And I was like, well, Blake's really smart." And Ben's like, presumably the CIA knows some smart people. Is there some kind of personal connection that he has to this? And I thought, oh, okay, well, what if Sam Garcia, the guy in the office, what if Blake had met Sam Garcia before? And then so then I was able to work in that 7 years ago thing. And but as far as balancing the bits with the psychiatrist's office and the NASA stuff, in my first draft, again, it was pretty much Blake would say, well, here's what's happened. And then there would be a chapter of NASA. And then they would be back in the psychiatrist's office. And then the conversation would lead him to another thing. So it was pretty I don't know if diegetic is the word I'm looking for, but it really made it seem like the chapters in between the NASA chapters, were him talking directly to his psychiatrist. And it was kind of clunky. It felt kind of artificial. It didn't really work. But I was able to fix that because another thing that Benjamin Stevenson said to me was that when he read the first draft, he kept what was kind of keeping him going was wondering how Blake got caught and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. Like you open
Yes.
that first page, because he'd read all the other Blake books as well, and he was like, okay, Blake's finally been caught. How did this
Yes.
happen?
Yes.
And
That's massive.
yeah, and of course, what is eventually revealed is that he was not caught. He's there on a mission for the CIA. But that wasn't really a twist in the first draft. It was just I hadn't really thought about why the reader would think he was in hospital.
Mm.
This plot was so complicated that I was firing on all cylinders, just trying to work out what was going to happen, not what the reader was thinking about what had already happened. So when Ben said that he was waiting for this twist that never came, I was like, oh, that really should be a twist. And then I had to kind of restructure the balance of hospital stuff and NASA stuff to put that twist in, to imply that Blake had been caught and then pull the rug out when you realize that he's still working for the CIA. That was
That
very difficult.
that is one of the big, I think, pull throughs. Absolutely, that is one of the things that you're reading for.
Well, no credit to me, all credit to Benjamin Stevenson, author of Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone.
I think you take a little bit of credit there, mate.
Yeah, that's what he said as well when I thanked him.
Yeah, sure. Falco is actually saying that Falco agrees. And then Falco is also sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm sorry about that. It did make Falco question whether or not Timothy Blake was just making everything up. What was
Right.
reality? Was he an unreliable narrator? I think that's really interesting too. There's another question over here I really want to ask you because I have the same question. This is from Tony Nippard, and Tony is asking, where do we find the answer to the riddles?
Oh, right. So,
I got embarrassingly few right, can I say?
yeah, okay, no worries. The short answer is you can find them at jackheathwriter.com/riddles. They are all there. If your subsequent question is why aren't they in the book, then I can say, well, they are. The answer to each riddle is hidden in each chapter if you look closely enough. But also, I knew that if there was like a thing at the back where there's all the answers, the reader they'd think about it for a couple of seconds and then they'd flip to the back and go, of course, and then go back. And the spell of the book is kind of lost.
That's
Like
interesting.
if you're making them flick back and forth, you're doing it wrong, I always think. So even though it's frustrating to not have the answers in a neat list at the back of the book, I'm sticking to my guns and not putting them there because
Yeah,
I want to keep the reader kind of immersed in the thing. If
I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair.
Yeah, but jackheathwriter.com/riddles, they're all there, I think.
There you go.
Unless you have the misfortune of having like the German edition or the French edition, which has a completely different set of riddles. Because of course
Oh,
they're all linguistic, they're all wordplay. So the translators had to come up with their own riddles
that's really interesting.
but the answer still had to be in the chapter. So often the answer is the same, but the riddle
Wow.
is different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, wow. I hadn't thought of that. That's really interesting.
If I can just quickly answer the thing about the fantasy and the unreliable narrator,
Oh, sure. Go
um,
ahead.
I always try to give the reader the sense that Blake, in every book, I pull this same trick, so it doesn't always work, particularly if you've been reading this series in a while. But towards the end, I always try to make the reader wonder if Blake himself might be the killer. And because a lot of my favorite books in this genre where half the fun is that it's in the mind of a madman
Mhm.
is kind of the dangerous lunatic main character starting to become suspicious of him or herself. Like that's
Yeah.
always really really fun to me. So I try to include something early in each and every book where Blake does something that there's often something where he has a thought and then someone else responds to it and he realized he must have said it out loud. Or there's often a bit where he'll
Hmm.
fall asleep and then wake up somewhere else. Like I always try to plant those things early so as the reader doesn't feel entirely safe with Blake, and so as Blake doesn't feel safe with himself either. It's an important part of the template that I'm kind of using. So
That's
I'm
really
glad it
cool.
worked for you.
Yeah, clearly it did. That's really cool. That's really clever. I wouldn't have noticed such subtleties, but my brain did. In the back of my brain, I would have noticed. That's really cool. Can we talk? How did you come up with the plot of this particular case, the Chinese astronaut fallen from space? How did you? Well, oh, anyway, we won't. I mean, we can go into spoilers, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah. If you haven't read it yet, I think we're about to veer into spoiler territory
Yeah,
because
sorry about that. There is someone, sorry, I do have to say, there is someone up here who is waiting, and I'm sorry, we do, if you want to bow out, that's totally
yeah.
reasonable.
And also, and how about after
Sorry,
I'm
Anne.
done talking spoilers, I'll just wave my hands like this. So you can like mute for a while, and then when I
Yeah,
wave my hands like this, we've stopped doing spoilers, okay?
all right. Anne,
Cool.
you ready? Thanks, Anne. Sorry to do that to you.
This is great because it's an opportunity for me to be honest for once in my career. The thing is that usually someone asks, "Where did you get the idea for the book?" And I always have to say in my head, "Well, the answer to your question is a spoiler. So instead, I'll make up some other story about where the idea came from." So in this particular instance, years ago, I was thinking about writing a YA novel set in an insane asylum. I think the draft title was The Nut House or something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, what would be really cool would be if there was a character who had all these crazy theories. And then just by coincidence, one of them, the craziest one, turned out to be true. And it
Mm.
was about a foreign intelligence agency. And the foreign intelligence agency heard that someone like somehow knew in the nut house and then sent someone to kill them. That was the idea for this book. And it never eventuated, but I later managed to find room for it in Headcase. So that
Oh.
is what the whole plot hinged on. I'm waving my arms again. That's the end of
No,
spoiler
no, I'm not
territory
done. I'm
and
not
confirmed.
done.
Oh,
No.
wait.
I've got one more. Oh,
Okay,
sorry,
hang
Anne.
on. And you're going to
Yeah.
have to mute again. Ben has another question for me, and it might be spoilery.
And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We got one more very quickly. I just wanted to
Okay.
very quickly ask about where you left Timothy at the end of this. It's a trap, Annie. Sorry, it is fucking.
Ah, right. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you,
Okay. That,
he's like you said, this is what you wanted to do right from the start, where he
yeah.
sort of progressed. Are we now? We've got a different Timothy Blake on our hands. Where are we at?
Yeah, that is you're right, that is a spoiler and it's
Massive
a
spoiler.
fun thing to be able to talk about. So uh, I think one of the sort of contradiction at the heart of this story is it's not just Blake's story, right? I discovered early on that Blake is only really an interesting character when Thistle is around, or at least when she's on his mind. Because without her, he is just nihilistic. Like he hates himself, but also doesn't really care about hating himself because, as far as he's concerned, life is meaningless. He
Yeah.
was fated to be like this, blah, 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 blah. And then
Yeah.
Thistle comes along, and not only is she something he wants, she's someone that he could have been. There was, because she had the same awful childhood that he had, he could have turned out great like her and didn't, which implies that he has some blame, which makes him feel guilty as
Oh,
opposed to
yeah.
nihilistic, and that kind of just makes him a more interesting character. So I'm thrilled that at the end of this one they kind of end up together. But the thing is, in the past, whenever I tried to put them together, I thought, but they can't be, because she's an FBI agent and he's a cannibal. They
Yeah.
just, she would not love this man. But over the course of the last 4 books, he's done enough things that also make it impossible for her to let him go. Like, I don't feel like loving Blake is going to be comfortable for Thistle, but I also feel like, given the number of times he has saved her life, not, in order to not expecting any kind of reward, in fact,
Yeah.
often expecting to die in the process.
Selflessly, yeah.
Yeah, and the number of times he has saved other people's lives, and the number of courageous things he has done and demonstrated his capacity for change and for good, she also can't not love him. So she can't love him, but she can't not love him either. And that's why she kind of lets him in at the end. I think there's hope there for that relationship.
Yeah,
That
plus
it
he
would have felt
also-
like too much for her to like forgive him entirely.
Yeah, well, she doesn't forgive him, but he is sort of proclaiming, "I'm a new man now. Like I've changed a little bit." Even though that's a little bit grey too. Let me say, like it's not concrete yet, but he's
Yeah.
yeah, that's on purpose
And
too.
would you forgive a guy who, like, even if he had changed, does the things he's done in the past? I mean, yeah, there is a real life, one of the rare real life cannibals, like alive and well in Japan. He's been like released from prison, hasn't eaten anyone since, as far as anyone knows, but he still can't get a job. Like, would you hire a guy who ate someone once? I mean, even if he's demonstrated capacity for reform?
No, but surely it would. It's better than no change.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I reckon, Anne, you can come back in now.
Come back,
That's
Anne,
all
yeah.
good.
Thank you, Anne. That's very nice of you to do that for us.
Yeah, I hope we didn't ruin anything for you, and I hope you still do enjoy the books. So yeah,
Yeah. So I've got other questions though. Can we talk very quickly about this idea of that you're writing about a different place with different laws and different agencies and different politics and different government agencies, and people can carry a gun, and it must take a fair amount of research and thought and time. Or I'm really curious about how you do that, because you
Yeah.
know what, if your answer was I watched a bunch of cop shows, I don't think I'd be mad. I think that would be fine.
Well, yeah, okay. I watched a bunch of cop shows. I did go to Houston, Texas, as part of my research in 2010. So this is long before the book came out, but when I was already a couple of years into the first draft of it. But I think it's not always necessarily a matter of doing research. It's a matter of, so I kind of love American English. And sometimes I love it because it's practical. Like in Australian English, we would say a torch when we mean a torch, but a torch could also be a burning stick, right? In American English, there's no confusion. A flashlight is a torch, and a torch is a torch. And
Yep.
so all sorts of things like that. But it got to kind of whenever I was watching TV or reading an American book, because a lot of the media I consume is American, whenever I saw something that we didn't have or didn't say or didn't do in Australia, I would always be like, how can I work that into the story? Like, it felt like there were all these cool American writers doing cool American things that felt forbidden to me because I had no personal experience of them. And then that was kind of the appeal. The appeal of writing a book set in the United States was to get to play with all these toys that we don't get, like tube socks. you know how in Australia we just have socks, in the United States they have tube socks. And
Yeah.
so I was like, wow, how can I include a tube sock just so as I can use the term tube sock? And so in the first book, one gets stuffed into someone's mouth and then they get gaffer taped or duct taped, as they would say over there, like as a gag. It's full of that kind of thing. And but the other end of the research is just showing the work to knowledgeable people. So, for example, Christopher Ragland, who reads the audiobooks, he recently corrected me on in America they don't say you go to hospital, they say you go to the hospital. It's always the hospital, not just go to hospital like it would be in Australia. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good tip.
Yeah, I wouldn't
But
have picked that up.
there's other kinds of, not so much American research, but I was on a shuttle bus at 5 a.m. with Dr. Richard Harris. Dr. Harry calls himself. He was the anaesthetist behind the Thai cave rescue. Was Australian of the Year some time
Yeah, I
ago.
watched
Anyway,
that documentary. Yeah.
yeah, right. So shuttle bus, 5 a.m, and he was there, I was there, and I said, so my wife's cousin was one of the AFP divers who worked on the Thai cave rescue. And he said, really? Which one? And I said, oh, his name was Ben. And he said, oh, all those guys had nicknames. Snuffy? Was it Snuffy? And I said, yeah, I don't really care. The point is you and me are basically cousins, so you owe me a favor. Can you read my book? And so I manipulated Harry into reading a draft of Headcase, and then he invented the fictitious technology that Dr. Laurie uses, like injecting into the bloodstream to put oxygen. Like he in the shuttle bus, he came up with that idea. Or I already had some version of it, but he came up with a name for it and made it much more authentic. And then there's a scene in a hyperbaric chamber where he read that and he was like, nope, that wouldn't happen. That is not how all this stuff works. So I kind of rewrote that chapter extensively based on his feedback and criticism. So yeah, I spend my life looking for people who have different life experiences and different knowledge sets to me, and I try to trick them into reading drafts so as I can find. That's how I do my research.
That's amazing. Anne is saying there, wow, right time, right place. Like, what if you hadn't been on that shuttle bus? I mean,
I know that last chapter would be hugely inaccurate. I do have other doctor friends who I sometimes press to write or to read stuff for me, but this particular chapter I was feeling pretty confident on it. I was like, I've done my research, I've read all this stuff on the NASA website, I'm sure that's all right. And then it took like a real life working, like not just a doctor but a doctor who specializes in this to go like, no, that's all wrong. So yeah, it's no, Fiona, there is nothing Dr. Harry can't do. He is an amazing human being.
That's amazing. Thank you, Donna. That's very nice. Nice that you've enjoyed our evening. We are getting to the point where we are going to have to wrap up in about 10 minutes. If you have any burning questions for Jack, please ask him. You may never. This is your shuttle bus moment, everyone. You've got him here. You have to ask the questions, just like Jack was brave enough to do. Donna saying thanks as well. That's awesome, Donna. I've just got a really easy question, hopefully an easy question. You are one of the most prodigious writers in Australia, probably, right? I mean, your output is huge. And I'm just wondering what your routine is like. Like, I know that you've been on a bit of a social media blackout for a couple of months now, right? To get focused. Tell us about your writing routine and what you do.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I don't want to. I still feel like I should be able to accomplish more than I do on any given day, but I find that. So, firstly, I've started getting up early. Other writers have talked about this for decades, and I only recently got around to trying it because I found that by the time it was very easy before I had kids. I would like roll out of bed, go to my desk, and then start typing, and then eventually I'd get hungry enough to eat breakfast. Now I have two children, age 3 and age 8. So I discovered that by the time I got them fed and their lunches packed, and my wife fed and my wife's lunch packed because she runs her own business as well, and then kind of shove everyone out the door and then drive them, to their various workplaces and schools and then drive back, I was
Same boat, mate.
exhausted. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had no energy left. So now I get up between sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock. I go straight to my desk. I do a Pomodoro, like a 25-minute
Yep.
focused writing session. Then I kind of go back inside, get everyone out the door, and then I go back to my desk with the intention of writing, but that never actually happens. I kind of stuff around for the rest of the day until like 2:30 when I realize I haven't written anything, and then get back to work. So I've discovered it works much better if I go to a cafe or a library or somewhere
Wow,
away
that's
from home.
interesting.
That helps.
That's so
Um,
relatable, though. I feel the same way. I actually have a
that's a relief.
Yeah, I have a full-time job that I get distracted by, but if I know that I would just not be writing anyway, even if I didn't have the job, because you do kind of end up, it's the hardest part.
Yeah, I feel like I and a lot of other writers I know have had. Well, I don't know a lot of other writers who write full time. Most of them have secret day jobs or semi-secret day jobs. But every other full time writer I know had the same problem that I had, or where they had a job and would write at night,
Yeah,
and
that's me.
then or in the early morning or something, and they'd managed to pull together 1,500 words a day, and then they quit their day job and go like, well, now I'll be able to write 10,000 words a day because I only had an
All
hour
this
before.
time,
And
yep.
yeah. And then they realized that actually they're still only pulling together the same
Yeah,
amount.
yeah,
So yeah, that's it's an ongoing problem. I've discovered that it helps to write out a scene just in bullet points before I start, often with like pen and paper, because if you're trying to work out what to say and how to say it at the same time, often I don't have the brain power.
yeah.
And often I decide that it must be the writing software that's the problem rather than me. And I end up installing new software and then finding fault with that as well.
Yeah, I understand. I've been
Yeah.
there too, man. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I really
Okay.
want to quickly go through a bunch before we let you go.
Yep. Sure.
Um, Tony here has said, I thought Jack, which is you, had to have been a real weirdo to write such a twisted character, but now
You're
I
not
get it.
wrong.
Yeah, yeah, both things are right. He's not twisted, but he also is kind of a little bit maybe. But yeah, Tony's just really appreciative. Jen has asked, is the audio for Headcase available yet? Is that not out at the moment?
March 1st is the
Okay, so
date. There
soon.
was we had to wait for the particular actor to become available, and there was also some shuffling around of release dates for the print book and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yes, I insisted that we get the same guy, and he has recorded it, and it'll come out on March 1st. That's my
Yeah,
understanding.
that's awesome to keep that consistency, though. That's a really good idea. Gordana's just saying, thank you, Jack. That's awesome. And Nikki saying, thanks for sharing. Everyone loves you, man. We must have you back for when you release the new one. Anne is saying that Sarah Bailey's quote on the front was the thing that got her reading the books.
That's wonderful, but I also feel a bit guilty because I believe that quote from Sarah Bailey is reused from a previous book in the series. I think so.
Jack, no,
I
don't reveal that. No.
I'm not convinced Sarah Bailey has read Headcase. I think she read Hideout, or maybe even Hunter,
Yeah, right.
and something like that. It wasn't. There were other authors who I got to read this one, and I got quotes from them, but the publisher just liked the Sarah Bailey one best. But yes,
It
I
is a good one.
definitely owe Sarah Bailey a drink.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question too. Is it hard to have other authors read and recommend your books? Do you feel a sense of, because I'm just speaking from my own knowledge here, my own circumstance, but yeah, do you feel an extra heightened sense of nervousness about them reading your work? Because I do.
I, I do, yeah. And I think it's partly that, I mean, they say that over the course of your career, you get used to bad reviews and it becomes just like water off a duck's back. And that is true. But I've also found that the corollary to that is that you stop getting any pleasure from good reviews as well. Like you just stop caring about what reviewers think. And
Mhm.
so I'm definitely at that stage of my career, but I am not at the stage yet where I don't care what other authors think. For whatever reason, I respect their opinion more than that of critics.
They're your
So
colleagues. They're in the same boat. So
yeah, exactly. The esteem of your peers is probably important in any profession. But yeah, it makes me extremely proud when someone like, Candace Fox or Gabriel Bergmoser or whatever says something
yeah,
nice about my work. That's always a rare treat, and I go to bed smiling.
yeah, you take that on top of the negative criticism if you get any. Anne is saying she was actually recommending Hangman. So
Oh,
that's
right. Okay. So that's way back in the day. Don't know if she read any others since. And Gordana, Ben Hobson is an author. He's
man.
amazing. His new
Thank
book is called The Death of John Lacey, and it comes out when, Ben?
It comes out in like a week, actually. One
Wow!
week. I know.
Congratulations, Ben.
Thank you,
Cannot wait to
Jack.
read it.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Gordana. And thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jane. Yes. It's not about me, though. We're here for Jack. I always feel bad when this happens, but you guys are very lovely. I have one more question from Bethany.
Hmm.
It seems like, Jack, you have some kind of bucket list of crazy slash awesome slash wacky things that you want to have happen in your books. Is this true? Do you just have ideas out of the ether, or do you have like a backlog, a big list of crazy ideas that you want to put into books?
No, I have a
Thank you,
huge
Gordana.
backlog, and my greatest fear is that the publishing industry will collapse before I get to all of them. You asked why you talked about me being prolific earlier, and that's probably actually the main secret behind my prolificness is that I have this real sense of time running out. Like I meet all these kids who don't read books anymore, and I'm like, I really have to get all these things out because please don't make me become a screenwriter. I don't want to become a screenwriter. I love books. They make me happy. I didn't own a TV for like a year and a half, and it was the best year and a half of my life. I really just want to kind of get all these ideas onto the page while there are still readers to share them with. So
Oh, that's
I write
nice.
as fast as I can.
Yeah, right. Can you actually, do you mind? I mean, this is a bit strange. Do you
Oh,
mind
go on.
panning to the right? Because I know you've got your actual
Oh, yeah,
catalog.
sure.
You guys want to
So,
see his
well,
catalog?
welcome
It's amazing.
to my office, everyone. Over here we have. Oh, I'm looking at the screen. So lots of foreign editions and stuff. But this shelf with the funny bookends is all the books that I've written. So there's that first one that I wrote when I was a baby writer as a teenager, and then there's Headcase, the 40th one over there. And if you're counting them and saying that's only 39, one of them was only released as an ebook. So there you go. I think
That's
I might just stop. Oh, no, those black things aren't ears, Jane. They're quotation marks. Like
that's
these.
funny.
However that works.
Jane, that's
Yeah,
pretty brilliant how you put the foreshadowing at the start of this chat and you brought it all the way back. That's some writer's gift
yeah.
there.
I better watch my back.
Yeah, she's coming for you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. That is sort of the end of the evening. It's been awesome to chat with you, Jack, man. I really do want to have you back. Are we expecting a new one in this series? Is there a locked in date or anything like that?
Oh, look, I always write every single one as though I'll never do another one. That's the other part we were talking before about with sequels, like doing a recap at the beginning. The other part of that is I never hold anything back for sequels. I hate it when other authors do it, when like you read a book where it feels unfinished just because they wanted to write more books. So no, I don't have any other Hangman books planned. I would love to write them, but I also have a lot on my plate. I have 300 Minutes of Mystery coming out next year. I have another kids spy thriller. I have a sequel to Kill Your Brother at the moment called Kill Your Husband, which will come out later in the year. And if that's a hit, I'd also like to write a book called Kill Your Boss.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I have a lot of other stuff to do. I won't say this is the last we've seen of Blake and Thistle, and particularly if
Yeah.
one of these TV deals or something comes through, then there would obviously be a financial incentive for me to write more. But at the moment, just devour Headcase because there may be no dessert.
That's a great way to finish. Thank you, Jack, and thank you so much, everyone, for your support. There's been some lovely comments in the chat.
You guys
really
all asked such good questions. I
They're
really
really good,
appreciate it. Thank you.
the best audience. I love you guys. Next month, if you're interested, as always, the Libby app and Overdrive do offer the books across Australia through libraries, so you're able to get the book on ebook, and it's non-exclusive, so anyone can borrow it. And so we've had that with the Libby app with Headcase. this month, which is how I read it, but I also bought a copy of the book.
Mm.
But next month, we are going to be looking at a book called The Gifted Son by Genevieve Gannon. And I haven't read this book yet. And from what I've read about it, it seems like it's going to be a little bit, we've done a few thrillers, but this one seems like it's going to be a bit of a thriller, but a bit of a down to earth kind of drama, like a family sort of drama. So I'm really looking forward to that one in our discussion with Genevieve next month, which will be on the 4th Tuesday of the month. Just keep an ear out. And if you're interested too, actually, I will take just a second to do this awkwardly on camera. Sorry, Jack, for keeping you here.
So good.
Very quickly, I'm going to put the link to the Facebook group, if I can do this seamlessly. Because the Facebook group is sort of where I keep everyone up to date with, authors coming up and where to register for events and things like that. So if you're interested in joining us for the next one, I'll just put this here. Can you give us G? So is it Genevieve? It's Genevieve Gannon. It is sorry, actually, you know what? I'll copy and paste her name as well. I believe this is like her 5th book, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're interested, join up to the Facebook group. It's just a really great way to have, Gifted Son. It's a very good way to have thank you, Julianne, a good chat about the book. And if you have any questions for our authors, I'd just love to hear them. But it's a great place to gather. You can see the quality of all the different people in this chat. That's the quality of Ben's Book Club peeps. So get along if you're interested and join the group.
I'm looking at the Goodreads for Gifted Son right now, and that looks like a really cool book. I might tag along.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'd love to have you.
Can't promise that my questions will be up to the caliber of the ones that we've seen tonight. I'll be more like stuff like, where do you get your ideas? But yeah.
You know what? That is a good question, though. Like, I always come back to that one because I want to know, where do they get their ideas? That's why I asked you that a little bit. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. Thank you so much, Jack. Round of applause for Jack. You've been so
thank you.
Very appreciative of you.
And thank you for having me, to everyone, to Libby, to Overdrive, to Ben, to all you wonderful people. It's been great.
Oh, awesome, man. All right. And I'll see all of you guys next month. But without further ado, we'll say bye. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you in the Facebook group. Bye.
I don't know if the recording is over. I should probably leave for real. Bye, Ben.